The words hung in the air between us like poison, my brother's voice barely above a whisper as mourners filed past our father's casket. "Don't get your hopes up, Maggie. You get nothing from the will." I stood frozen in my black dress, raindrops from the cemetery still clinging to the fabric, unable to process what Daniel had just said. Not because of the inheritance. Money had never been my motivation for coming home after 10 years away, but because of the cold satisfaction in his eyes when he delivered the news, as if he'd been waiting years for this moment to twist the knife. The funeral home smelled of lilies and that distinct chemical undertone that fails to mask death completely. Dad's body lay in an open casket at the front of the room, his face waxy and unrecognizable to me after years of absence. He looked nothing like the vibrant, sometimes volatile man who had raised us, the man who had driven me away a decade ago with words I still couldn't forget. "You heard me," Daniel continued when I didn't respond, adjusting his perfectly pressed suit. "At 42, my brother had our father's build, but none of his warmth. Dad changed the will last year. Cut you out completely." Said someone who couldn't be bothered to come home for 10 years doesn't deserve a penny of what he built. A distant aunt approached, saving me from having to respond. She clasped my hands in hers, murmuring condolences I could barely hear over the rushing in my ears. I nodded mechanically, my eyes fixed on Dad's mahogany casket with its brass fixtures gleaming under the soft lights. 10 years since I'd seen him. 10 years of unanswered calls that eventually stopped coming. 10 years of Christmas cards returned unopened. All because of that final, explosive argument where he told me I was dead to him if I moved to Seattle with James, the man Dad had deemed not good enough for his daughter. Now Dad was actually dead, and according to Daniel, I was still nothing to him. Nothing worth remembering in his will, nothing worth forgiving. The irony was, James and I had broken up just 8 months after the move. Dad had been right about him, though I'd never admitted it. Pride and stubbornness had kept me from calling, from apologizing. That and the fear that he really had meant those final words, "You walk out that door with him, Maggie, and you're no daughter of mine." Margaret? I turned to find Walter Greenfield, Dad's attorney for as long as I could remember, standing beside me. His face had more lines than I recalled, his hair completely silver now, but his eyes were the same, kind, thoughtful, observant. "Walter," I managed, forcing a smile. "It's good to see you. Though I wish the circumstances were different." "As do I." He glanced toward Daniel, who was now speaking with the funeral director across the room. "I wondered if we might talk privately for a moment, about your father's arrangements." Before I could respond, Daniel materialized at my elbow, as if summoned by the attorney's presence. "Whatever you need to discuss about Dad's estate can wait until tomorrow's official reading, Walter." His voice was smooth, professional, the voice he used in the promotional videos for the family construction business. He'd been running with Dad for the past 15 years. Walter's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course, the reading is scheduled for 10 a.m. at my office." He handed me his card. "Both of you should attend." Daniel made a dismissive sound. "No need for Maggie to come. I've already explained the situation." Walter's gaze settled on me. "Nevertheless, I insist that both Armstrong children be present." Then, more gently, "Your father would have wanted it that way." After Walter moved away, Daniel turned to me with narrowed eyes. "Don't get your hopes up. Walter's just following protocol." I found my voice at last, anger finally cutting through the shock. "Is that really all you can think about right now? Money? Dad is lying dead 10 feet away from us." "Don't you dare," Daniel hissed, keeping his voice low as a couple approached to offer condolences. He smiled and thanked them before continuing. "Don't you dare pretend you care now. Where were you when he had his first heart attack 3 years ago? Where were you all those Christmases he sat staring at your empty chair at the table? Where were you last month when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do?" Each question landed like a physical blow. I had no defense, no explanation that wouldn't sound hollow even to my own ears. "I'm his daughter," was all I could manage. You were his daughter, Daniel corrected. Then you became the ungrateful child who broke his heart and never looked back. I wanted to argue, to explain that it had been more complicated than that I had looked back every day, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain the paralyzing mixture of pride, shame, and fear that had kept me away? How could I make Daniel understand when I barely understood it myself? Instead, I simply said, "I'll see you at the reading tomorrow," and walked away, needing air that didn't smell of flowers and formaldehyde. Outside the funeral home, the Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving everything glistening under the weak afternoon sun. I leaned against the brick wall, gulping in fresh air, my mind spinning with memories and regrets. The sound of the door opening made me straighten, expecting more mourners. Instead, an elderly woman with a cane emerged, her movements slow but deliberate. It took me a moment to recognize Mrs. Larson, our former next-door neighbor. "Margaret," she said, stopping beside me. "I thought that was you in there. You look so much like your mother now." The comparison to my mother, who had died of cancer when I was 15, made my throat tighten. "Mrs. Larson, it's good to see you." She studied my face with the directness that comes with advanced age. "Your father missed you terribly, you know." I looked away, unable to bear the gentle accusation. "Daniel seems to think Dad never forgave me." Mrs. Larson made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. "Your brother has his own version of reality. Always has." She patted my arm with a papery hand. "Your father was too proud to call you, just as you were too proud to call him. But he talked about you, asked me about my granddaughter in Seattle, whether she ever ran into you there." This revelation made my eyes sting with sudden tears. "He did? Of course he did. You were his little girl." She shook her head slowly. "Such a waste. All those years you could have had together. Lost to stubbornness, the Armstrong family trait." Before I could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "There you are. People are asking for you. At least pretend to care about saying goodbye properly." Mrs. Larson gave him a long look. "Daniel, still the dutiful son, I see." Something in her tone made Daniel's jaw tighten, but he managed a stiff nod before disappearing back inside. "Don't let him rewrite history," Mrs. Larson said quietly. "Your father had room in his heart for both his children, despite what Daniel might want you to believe." With that cryptic statement, she made her way back inside, leaving me with more questions than answers and a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, hope that perhaps my father had not died hating me after all. The law offices of Greenfield and Associates occupied the entire 12th floor of an old but well-maintained building downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early for the reading, partly from nervousness and partly from the habit of punctuality Dad had drilled into me since childhood. Walter's receptionist, a young woman with a kind smile, led me to a conference room with a view of Puget Sound. "Mr. Greenfield will be with you shortly," she said. "Can I get you some coffee or water while you wait?" I requested water and sat at the long table, watching ferries cross the Sound, trying to calm my racing heart. Whatever happened in the next hour wouldn't change the fact that Dad was gone, that our reconciliation would now never happen, that 10 years of potential memories had been sacrificed on the altar of pride and stubbornness. Daniel arrived precisely at 10, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. He nodded curtly at me, but said nothing as he took a seat across the table. Walter entered a moment later. Carrying a folder and accompanied by a younger man he introduced as his associate. After a few perfunctory remarks about the procedure, Walter opened the folder and began to read Dad's will in his measured, legal voice. I listened with half an ear as he detailed the standard preamble, the payment of debts and funeral expenses, and various small bequests to longtime employees and charities. My focus sharpened when Walter reached the main assets, the house, the business, and the investment accounts. To my son, Daniel James Armstrong, I leave 51% ownership of Armstrong Construction, the company we built together, along with the sum of $1 million from my personal accounts. Daniel's expression remained impassive, though I detected a slight relaxing of his shoulders, confirmation of what he already knew. The remaining 49% of Armstrong Construction, Walter continued, I leave to my daughter, Margaret Elizabeth Armstrong. The words hung in the air. I stared at Walter, certain I had misheard. Daniel's composure cracked. What? That's impossible. Dad changed the will last year. He cut her out completely. Walter looked at Daniel with an expression of mild surprise. I'm afraid that's incorrect, Daniel. Your father never changed his will. This is the same document he signed 5 years ago, after your mother's passing. No, Daniel insisted, color rising in his face. He told me specifically that he was changing it, that she wouldn't get anything after abandoning the family. Walter's voice remained calm. I was your father's attorney for 30 years, Daniel. He never requested any changes to his will. If someone told you otherwise, they were mistaken or deliberately misleading you. The implication hung in the air as Walter continued reading. To my daughter, Margaret, I also leave the family home and its contents, with the hope that she will find her way back to it someday, even if I am no longer there to welcome her. Tears blurred my vision as Walter's words washed over me. Dad hadn't hated me. He hadn't disowned me. He'd left me part of the business and the house where I'd grown up, the house filled with memories of both him and Mom. This is ridiculous, Daniel cut in. I've been running that company for 15 years. I've been taking care of Dad, living in that house, while she was off doing God knows what on the other side of the country. She doesn't deserve any of it. Walter closed the folder. Your father's wishes are quite clear, Daniel. I'll contest it, Daniel said, standing up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This isn't what he wanted, not toward the end. Walter remained unruffled. You're welcome to try, of course, but I should mention there's a letter that accompanies the will. He withdrew an envelope from the folder and held it out to me. Your father asked that I give this to Margaret privately after the reading. Daniel stared at the envelope in my hands with naked hostility before grabbing his briefcase. This isn't over, he said, and stormed out. Walter sighed as the door slammed. I apologize for your brother's behavior. This must be very difficult for both of you. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Did he really never change the will? Never talked about cutting me out? Walter shook his head. Quite the opposite. He talked often about hoping you would come home. He stood, gathering his papers. I'll give you some privacy to read your father's letter. Once alone, I turned the envelope over in my hands several times before finally working up the courage to open it. Inside was a single page covered in Dad's neat, precise handwriting. The penmanship of a man who had drawn up countless construction plans by hand before computers took over. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I've finally managed to do the one thing I promised your mother I would never do. Leave you alone in this world. I'm sorry for that, and for so much more. I was wrong that night. Wrong to judge James, wrong to give you that impossible ultimatum. Wrong to let my fear of losing you drive you away. A father should support his daughter's choices, not try to control them. It took me too long to realize that, and by then, my pride wouldn't let me pick up the phone. I told myself you should be the one to call, since you had left. Stubborn old fool that I was. I've kept tabs on you over the years. I know about your graphic design work, about the awards you've won. I have a file of newspaper clippings and printed web articles about your career. I know you and James didn't last, and I've wondered if that made it harder for you to come home. If you thought I would say I told you so, I wouldn't have. I just would have been grateful to see your face again. I'm leaving you the house because it should stay in the family, and because it contains all the best memories of our family when it was whole. You, me, your mother, and yes, even Daniel. I'm leaving you part of the business, not because I expect you to run it, but because it's your birthright too. And because I hope it might give you and your brother a reason to find your way back to being family again. Daniel has been a good son in many ways, but he has his limitations. Chief among them is his belief that love is a finite resource, that my caring for you somehow diminished what was available for him. Nothing could be further from the truth. A parent's heart expands to hold all their children, each in their own special chamber. If I could have one wish granted now, it would be to see you and Daniel reconcile. He may resist. Change has never come easily to him. But I believe there's still a chance for you two to be brother and sister again, not adversaries. I love you, Maggie. I never stopped, not for one day. And wherever I am now, I'm certain I still do. Forever your dad, Robert Armstrong. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter, hearing Dad's voice in every word, feeling a decade of misunderstanding and hurt begin to dissolve. He hadn't hated me. He'd loved me all along, had followed my career, had hoped I would come home. The door opened gently, and Walter peeked in. "Are you all right, Margaret?" I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Yes, thank you for this." I held up the letter. "It means more than I can say." Walter smiled. "Your father was a complicated man, but his love for his children was uncomplicated." He hesitated. "There's one more thing. ... Daniel doesn't know this, but your father made me promise to tell you. He kept your room exactly as it was the day you left. Said it would be waiting for you whenever you were ready to come home." Fresh tears threatened at this revelation. All these years, I'd imagined Dad erasing every trace of me from the house in his anger. But instead, he'd preserved my space, keeping it as a silent testament to his hope for my return. "Walter," I said, finding my voice, "did Dad ever say anything about Daniel telling me I was cut out of the will?" The attorney's expression turned grave. "Not explicitly, but in the last few months, as your father's health declined, Daniel became increasingly protective of his position. Robert mentioned being concerned that Daniel might try to create divisions where none existed." A cold realization settled over me. Daniel had lied, deliberately lied, at our father's funeral, trying to drive me away before the truth could come out. The magnitude of that betrayal was staggering. "What should I do?" I asked, more to myself than to Walter. He considered for a moment. "That depends on what you want, Margaret. If it's a fight, you certainly have grounds for one. If it's peace, that may be more difficult, but perhaps more in line with what your father hoped for." I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. "I need to go to the house. I need to see my room. And everything else Dad kept for me." Walter nodded. "Would you like me to call ahead, let Daniel know you're coming?" I thought about my brother's anger, his desperation to keep me away from what he considered exclusively his. I thought about Dad's wish for reconciliation and the uphill battle that would be. "No," I decided. "I think I'd better handle this myself." The drive to my childhood home took 20 minutes, but felt like crossing decades. Each familiar landmark brought a flood of memories. The park where Dad had taught me to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrate good report cards, the hardware store where he seemed to know every employee by name. The house itself looked smaller than I remembered, a sturdy craftsman built in the 1920s, with the wide porch where Mom used to read on summer evenings. Dad's truck was parked in the driveway, now presumably Daniel's. Next to it sat a sleek black Mercedes I didn't recognize. I pulled in behind them and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I took Dad's letter from my purse, holding it like a talisman as I walked up to the front door. I could have used my old key, which I'd kept all these years on my key ring, more from sentiment than practicality. But it felt wrong to enter that way after so long. Instead, I rang the doorbell, listening to the same chime that had announced visitors throughout my childhood. Footsteps approached, and then the door swung open to reveal not Daniel, but a woman about my age, stylishly dressed with an elegant blonde bob. She looked at me with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she inquired. "I'm looking for Daniel Armstrong," I said, suddenly uncertain. "I'm his sister Margaret." The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Maggie? Daniel's sister?" When I nodded, her expression changed to one of genuine welcome. "Please, come in. I'm Caroline, Daniel's wife." I stepped into the familiar entryway, momentarily disoriented by how much was the same and yet subtly different. The hardwood floors Dad had installed himself still gleamed, but the walls were now a fashionable gray instead of the warm beige Mom had chosen. Family photos still lined the staircase, but I noticed with a pang that the ones featuring me had been removed. "Daniel never mentioned he was married," I said, following Caroline into the living room, which had been completely redecorated in a sleek, contemporary style that bore no resemblance to the cozy space of my memories. Caroline gave a small laugh. 5 years now. He probably didn't mention our 3-year-old son either. The revelation that I had a nephew I'd never met hit me like a physical blow. No, he didn't. Caroline gestured for me to sit on one of the modern, angular sofas that had replaced Dad's beloved old leather couch. "Daniel doesn't talk much about his life before we met. I gathered there was some family estrangement, but he's never given me details." She studied my face. "You look a lot alike, you know? Same eyes." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Daniel's voice called out, "Caro, whose car is in the driveway?" He appeared in the living room doorway, stopping short when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" The hostility in his voice was unmistakable. Carolyn looked between us, her expression concerned. "Daniel, your sister just arrived. I was about to offer her some coffee." "She's not staying," Daniel said flatly, to me. "Whatever Walter told you, it doesn't change anything. This is my house now." I stood, Dad's letter clutched in my hand. "That's not what the will says, Daniel." Caroline's eyebrows rose again. "Will? Daniel, what's going on?" Daniel's face flushed. "Nothing. A minor legal misunderstanding that will be sorted out soon." He turned to me. "You need to leave now." "Not until we talk," I insisted. "Not until you explain why you lied to me at Dad's funeral." Caroline was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I think I should give you two some privacy." "No," Daniel and I said simultaneously, then glanced at each other in surprise at the momentary unity. "Please stay, Caroline," I added. "This concerns you too, as Daniel's wife, and as someone living in this house." Daniel's jaw worked as he struggled with his anger. Finally, he moved into the room, positioning himself between me and Caroline as if to protect her. "Fine, say what you came to say, then go." I took a deep breath. "You told me at the funeral that Dad had cut me out of the will, that I would get nothing." "That was a lie." Caroline looked at Daniel sharply. "Is that true?" Daniel avoided her gaze. "I told her what Dad told me. If Walter has some outdated version of the will—" "Stop it," I cut in. "Walter made it very clear that Dad never changed his will, never even discussed changing it. And he gave me this." I held up the letter. "A letter Dad wrote to me before he died." Daniel stared at the envelope, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "What does it say?" "It says he loved me, that he regretted our estrangement every day, that he kept my room exactly as it was when I left. I paused, watching my brother's expression carefully. It also says he hoped we would reconcile, Daniel, that we would find our way back to being family. Daniel scoffed, but there was something forced about it. Convenient timing with the will reading, isn't it? Suddenly you care about family. I've always cared, I said quietly. I was just too proud to make the first move. Like Dad, like you. Caroline touched Daniel's arm gently. Dan, is it possible you misunderstood what your father said about the will? Or that he changed his mind without telling you? Daniel pulled away from her touch, his face hardening. I know what he said. He told me Maggie had made her choice 10 years ago and didn't deserve to benefit from what we built without her. When did he tell you this? I asked. Last year, after his second heart attack. Daniel's voice held absolute conviction. I shook my head slowly. Dad wasn't himself after that heart attack, Daniel. The medications affected his mind. You must have noticed. Walter said Dad never discussed changing his will with him. And he was Dad's attorney for 30 years. Doubt flickered across Daniel's face, quickly replaced by renewed anger. So now I'm a liar and delusional? Is that what you're saying? No, I said carefully. I'm saying maybe Dad said things he didn't mean when he was sick and medicated. Or maybe you heard what you wanted to hear. Caroline intervened before Daniel could respond. Why don't we all take a breath? This is a lot to process, especially so soon after losing Robert. She turned to me. Would you like to see your room? If what you say is true, and Robert kept it for you all these years, it might help to see it. Daniel started to object, but Caroline silenced him with a look that suggested they'd had similar standoffs before, and that she usually won them. Yes, I said, I'd like that very much. Caroline led the way upstairs, with Daniel following reluctantly behind. The upper hallway was much as I remembered it, though the carpet had been replaced with something more modern. We stopped outside my old bedroom door, which was closed. This is the only room we haven't touched since moving in, Caroline explained. Daniel was adamant about leaving it exactly as it was. I glanced at my brother in surprise. You were? He looked uncomfortable. Dad insisted. Caroline opened the door, and I stepped into a time capsule of my 18-year-old self. The lavender walls, the bookshelf crammed with novels and art books, the desk where I'd sketched endless designs, the bulletin board covered with photos and concert tickets, all preserved exactly as I'd left them a decade ago. On the bed sat Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat I'd had since childhood, but had deemed too childish to take to Seattle. Beside him was something that made my breath catch, a stack of envelopes tied with ribbon. I crossed to the bed and picked them up. Each envelope was addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, each marked "Return to Sender" in my own angry scrawl. He kept them all, I whispered, turning to find Daniel watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Every letter I sent back unopened. Why would he do that if he hated me? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He was sentimental about everything to do with you. But you told me he cut me out of his will, that I meant nothing to him anymore. I set the letters down gently. Why would you lie about that, Daniel? Did you hate me that much? I don't hate you, he said after a long moment, his voice tight. I hated that he loved you more. The raw admission hung in the air between us. Caroline quietly excused herself, leaving us alone with a decade of misunderstandings. He didn't love me more, I said finally. That's not how it works. Isn't it? Daniel's laugh was bitter. You were always his favorite. The artistic one, like Mom, the one with potential. I was just the dutiful son who stayed and worked the business and took care of him when he got sick. I moved toward him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. Daniel, Dad loved you. He was proud of you. He left you controlling interest in the company because he knew how much you'd put into it. And he left you half of it anyway, even though you never drove a nail or poured a foundation or sat through a single zoning meeting. The old resentment colored his voice, but there was something else there too. Exhaustion, perhaps. Grief. I don't want to fight you for the company, I said, or for this house. I just want to understand why you lied to me. Why you tried to keep me away? Daniel leaned against the door frame, suddenly looking very tired. When Dad got sick the last time, I was the one who took him to every appointment. I was the one who sat with him through chemo and radiation. I was the one who listened to him talk about you. Always you, wondering where you were, what you were doing, why you never called. I didn't know he was sick, I said, my voice breaking. You never told me. Would you have come back if I had? The question seemed genuine, not accusatory. I thought about it honestly. I don't know. I was so sure he hated me. And I was ashamed that you had been right about James, ashamed that I'd thrown away my relationship with Dad for someone who didn't deserve it. Daniel nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. When he was dying, he asked for you. In his last days, when he was drifting in and out of consciousness, he'd call your name, not mine, not Caroline's, not even Mom's, yours. The pain in his voice cut through me. Oh, Daniel. I told myself he'd be better off not knowing you still didn't care enough to come, that it would just hurt him more to reach out to you and have you reject him again. So you never called me, I said softly. Never told me he was dying. No. There was no defiance in the admission, just resignation. And then after he died, when Walter called you about the funeral, I convinced myself that you were only coming for whatever you could get. That's not true, I whispered. I know that now, he acknowledged. I saw your face when you saw him in the casket. You didn't fake that. We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of 10 years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities settling between us. Finally, I said, Dad's letter mentioned something else. He said you believe love is a finite resource, that his loving me somehow took away from his love for you. Daniel looked away, but not before I caught the flash of vulnerability in his eyes. Logical, isn't it? There's only so much time, so much attention to go around. That's not how love works, I said gently. It's not a pie with limited slices. It multiplies. Easy for you to say. You were the one he called for at the end. The pain in his voice made my heart ache. For the first time, I truly understood what the estrangement had cost. Not just me and Dad, but Daniel too. He'd been there physically, doing everything right, while believing that emotionally, Dad was still reaching for his absent daughter. I'm sorry, I said simply. I'm sorry I left the way I did. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. I'm sorry I missed his final years. And I'm sorry that my absence hurt you too. Daniel seemed startled by the apology. I thought you'd come here demanding your share, ready to fight me for the company, for the house. I shook my head. I don't want to fight. Dad wanted us to reconcile, to be family again. That matters more to me than any inheritance. What do you want then? It was a fair question, one I hadn't fully answered for myself until this moment. I want to know my nephew. I want to get to know Caroline. I want to learn about the last 10 years of Dad's life. I paused. And I want us to try to be brother and sister again, if that's possible. Daniel was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving around the preserved bedroom, taking in the tangible evidence of Dad's enduring hope for my return. He left you the house, he finally said. It's yours legally, but it's also our home now. Mine, Caroline's, and Thomas's. My son, he added, answering my unspoken question. I don't want to displace you, I said. Maybe we can figure out an arrangement. You keep living here, and I'll take some time to decide what I want to do long term. The tension in Daniel's shoulders eased slightly. And the company? I know nothing about construction. You've been running it for years. Keep doing that. We can figure out the legal details later. He studied my face, as if searching for the catch. Why are you being so reasonable about this? After what I did? I thought about Dad's letter, about the years we'd lost, about the nephew I'd never met. Because I'm tired of letting pride and anger make my decisions. Aren't you? Something shifted in Daniel's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening. A door opening just a crack. Thomas has your eyes. Mom's eyes. The simple statement, offering connection rather than division, made tears spring to my eyes. I'd like to meet him. He's at preschool now. He'll be home this afternoon. Daniel hesitated. You could stay for dinner, if you want. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. I'd like that, I said. As we left my preserved bedroom, I paused to look back at the space Dad had kept waiting for me all those years. Whatever happened with the inheritance, with the company, with the house, I knew the most valuable thing Dad had left me was this chance, this opportunity to rebuild what had been broken, to find family again. Daniel, I said as we headed downstairs, what did Dad's note in your planner actually say about me, the one you saw last year after his heart attack? My brother was quiet for a moment, then admitted, it said, call Maggie, life's too short. He met my eyes briefly. I told him I would, but I never did. The simple truth of it, the missed opportunity that could have changed everything, hung between us. But instead of fresh anger, I felt only a deep sadness for all of us. For Dad, who died waiting for a reconciliation that never came. For Daniel, who felt eternally second best. And for myself, who had stayed away too long out of stubborn pride. We can't change the past, I said finally, but maybe we can do better with the future. Daniel nodded, and for the first time since I'd returned, there was no hostility in his eyes, only grief, regret, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a place to start.